Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this session tonight or today. And to start, as always, our sister Janet Carranza from Nicaragua is going to lead us to open this session with thanks. Thank you, Janeri, for being here, and I give you the floor.
Buenas noches, buenas tardes y buenos días,
Good
estimadas.
evening, good afternoon, and good morning, my dear sisters. It's a pleasure to be again with you. And today I am going to lead us in an invocation. So I would like to ask that you please lean down to thank our Father for everything that He's given us. Dear Father, Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to start a new month. And we thank you for the different blessings that you have awarded us and for allowing us to be here again together with our sisters to learn and to enjoy from the knowledge and the learnings that we have gained in this space. We thank you and we ask that you give us health, prosperity, and abundance. Thank you, sisters. We thank God, right, for allowing us to be here together again.
Gracias, Joneri. Pues con esta
Thank you, Janeri. After this invocation, we're ready to open our session for tonight. It's the evening, it's night in my region. But we're going to start with our agenda by giving a warm welcome to our special guest, who is going to talk to us about such an important topic for us women. So we give her a warm welcome. Our guest is an expert on the subject. Her name is Mariana Lopez. She is a sister with a lot of experience. She was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She graduated from the University of Buenos Aires in social anthropology. After graduation, she worked as research assistant at the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Pensamiento Latinoamericano, where she was awarded a research scholarship to carry out a study about the health illness processes in an Andean community, with a focus on women's role and the decision related to health. The last 10 years, Mariana Lopez has been involved in many indigenous peoples' processes as Social Affairs Officer of the United Nations Secretariat of Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, also as independent consultant for UNICEF, OHCHR, and CLAC, and has supported indigenous organizations as program director of the International Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI. She was responsible for the design, coordination, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of FIMI strategic programs. Also participation and political advocacy at the Global Leadership School of Indigenous Women, also with the Indigenous Women's Fund, INI, and the Indigenous Women's Watch Against Violence and the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility. From 2016 to 2020, Mariana served as program director of Pahuanca Fund, an indigenous-led fund, providing leadership in grant making, monitoring, and learning, and facilitating grant access to indigenous local communities of the 7 regions of the world, including North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, Arctic, Pacific, and Russia. With this trajectory and ample experience that she has, we thank her for accepting the invitation to be here with us and sharing her time to share with us right now. So we invite you to write down your questions, comments during this time that she's going to be sharing with us. So welcome, Mariana. We hope to take advantage of your extensive experience. She's going to talk to us about the of two bodies, CIDA, and also the CSW, which is the Commission on the Status of Women. It's important that we understand also how these mechanisms work and how to exercise our rights within the framework of these mechanisms. So Mariana, welcome. We hope that this session is very fruitful, and you have an hour and 10 minutes to present this subject. And of course, it depends on you how you're going to do that and how you're going to use your time. We invite all participants, all women leaders, to write down their questions, because we also would like to have your comments, your contributions at the end of the presentation by Mariana. Welcome, Mariana. The floor is yours. Thank you so much, Hortensia, for this welcome and introduction. Thank you to the entire FIMI team for this invitation. It's an honor for me to participate in the leadership school. And as Hortensia has said, I also worked with FIMI, and I participated in the first edition of the school. So for me, it's a great joy to see that now we are in the 10th edition, and the school becomes stronger and stronger, and more sisters can enrich through this process, which has been so important. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. The subject that we're going to discuss today, as you know, is the CSW. Those are the letters in English, and it's the Commission on the Status of Women. We're also going to talk about the CIDA, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Both are related, so that's why it's important that we see them both together. I am going to try to talk at a reasonable speed for everyone to be able to follow me, and also so that the interpreters can follow me as well. Any question that you have, you can write it in the chat, or you can raise your hand, you can interrupt. The idea is that we take the most advantage of the time that we have here together. But there will also be time later on for interacting. I am going to share my screen now with a presentation. And you're probably going to receive it from my colleagues at FIMI. So don't worry too much, because you will receive it later. You don't have to take notes about everything. You will get it later on. So let's see, let me make the slide as big as possible. If you see that the slides don't follow, if the presentation gets stuck, or if you can't hear me or anything, to let me know. I am really pleased to read some of the names. I know that our paths have crossed at some one time or another. And I hope to be able to have a moment to get to know you a little bit better later on and exchange information with you, because I think this is also very important. So as I was saying, we're going to start first talking about the CSW. Why are we going to start with the CSW? Well, because it was established before the CIDA. So the Commission on the Status of Women was established first. So that it was established in 1946, so many years ago. And it was established more or less when the UN started And it was precisely established as the main body dedicated exclusively to promoting equality based on gender, gender equality and equality for women. So when the UN started to exist in 1946, this commission was also created precisely to try to have this topic of gender equality and empowering women can be present at the UN from the beginning. Obviously, many changes have taken place afterwards because the mentality at what was considered important or a priority in 1946 is not the same that we think nowadays. So it is really interesting to have a historical perspective and to see how things have changed, how those priorities have changed, the challenges that existed then, because that shows us also the that when we interact with the UN, we may feel frustrated and we wonder, why? What am I going to this meeting for? Why do we dedicate so many resources to participate, to write a declaration or a statement, to get to a resolution? Why? Why don't I dedicate the same resources to build a school in my community? Often we wonder that. So to have this historical perspective shows me that advocacy was really important and we were able to achieve changes. The issue or the problem is that those changes happen very slowly. Everything that happened in the process of diplomacy, it's slow. However, it bears its fruit. So we're going to see little by little what those fruits are, those outcomes are. The important thing about the commission, about the CSW, is that it's an intergovernmental body. That is, those who participate in the decisions are the states, the governments. That's why it's called intergovernmental. That's very important for you to consider. The mandate, well, it's always very important to know the mandate. That is, what was this body created for? Why do I need to know the mandate? Because otherwise I could be mistaken and ask this something to a body that has not been created for that. So I waste my effort in that advocacy. That's why it's important to know what they were created for, what the mandates are. That way, when I go to carry out my advocacy, I can focus on the mandate that corresponds to that body. That way, I am efficient with my advocacy. So the mandate at the beginning, as I said, was to promote gender equality, something really general. However, this was expanded over time as the conversations about gender advanced, the mandate advanced and changed as well. So that means that it was done in writing. It's not that they say, okay, well, now we're going to change it with what it is for. No, no, it has to be in writing. So it expanded to include the promotion of equality objectives, development and peace, monitoring or overseeing the implementation of measures for the advancement of women, and review and evaluation of the progress made at national, regional, global levels. So this commission started to evaluating as well what happens at the national, regional, and global levels. Besides, it also included the follow-up of the Beijing Platform for Action. This platform, I imagine that you're going to be studying this at the school as well. And it means it's a plan, it's an action plans that came from the World Conference on Women in 1995. So we saw that it was created in 1946, and this is when, and then the platform, the Beijing Platform for Action, was incorporated after 1995. Okay, so how is this commission made up? Well, as I said, it's an intergovernmental commission. So it's made up of experts, but from the government. They're selected by the ECOSOC, the UN ECOSOC, which is the UN Economic and Social Council, but they represent countries, governments. Currently, it has 45 member states. So 45 countries make up the commission, and they rotate every 4 years. So they have 4-year terms. 13 are from Africa, 11 from Asia, 9 from Latin America and the Caribbean, 8 are from Western Europe and other states, and 4 from Eastern Europe. In this presentation, I'm going to leave some links that we're going to look at later on together. We're going to look online, but in the presentation, you're going to be able to find the list of all of the member states. And especially, you're going to be able to see whether your country is currently one of the members. As I was saying at the beginning, what was the role? What was CSW's role? Well, from 1947 to 1962, the commission was centered or focused on establishing standards and formulating international conventions. For example, the Human Rights Declaration, which is the first instrument on global rights. What did the commission do? It reviewed the language so that it doesn't only establish rights for men in general. So if you look at it, if you read the Declaration of Human Rights, it talks about people, persons. So that's a little change, but those little changes are the ones that start happening in all of the international instruments to include what we today call gender-focused language. So the international conventions that are under the commission are the Convention on the Political Rights of Women of 1953, the Convention on the Nationality of Married Women. So what happened when a woman got married with her nationality? Did she lose it? Did she not? You can read the convention. It's from 1957. And as you see, the topics were completely different to the priorities that we discussed today in all the conversations that have to do with gender equality. Also, the Convention on Consent to Marriage, the minimum age for marriage and registration of marriages. That's from 1962. The Convention on Equal Remuneration for Men and Women Workers for work of equal value. This convention is from the ILO, the International Labor Organization, is from 1951. So this convention was adopted by the ILO. What did the commission do? Well, precisely to incorporate the gender perspective. And lastly, but very important for the commission, is that it drafted the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So when you wonder, where did the CEDAW come from? It came from the CSW, from the commission. It took several years. You perhaps know how many years it took the United Nations to adopt or to declare the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, many years. Well, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women took, in total, more than 10 years, a little bit less than the declaration. But why does it take so long? Well, the commission starts drafting it. It passes on to another commission. Those states review it and they say, no, I don't want this here. I'm going to take it out. Obviously, there are states that are interested in having a good instrument through this convention. And for others, they're mostly interested in having the least possible on it because they don't, so that they can say, oh, I comply with it because it doesn't say much. So all of those arguments and fights, the same thing that happened with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which also happened from a different place. Same thing happened with the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. But it's important to know that the CSW at the beginning was dedicated to elaborating all of these international instruments. Good. CSW has a 2-week session every year, typically in March, where representatives from governments participate and they discuss certain specific topics to identify progress and challenges pending according to their agenda. And they then write recommendations, which are included in their final report in the form of resolutions. Here, I'd like to highlight the agenda. I have it in bold letters. Why? It's very important that whenever you have a chance, or if you've already done that, great. If you can participate at some UN event, it could be the CSW session. Before that, investigate the agenda, because all of these meetings have an agenda. So if you want to prepare for that meeting and see what you're going to do, how you're going to advocate, where you're going to prepare for your advocacy, you need to know the agenda. Why? Well, it's very important. You, perhaps, at your community's the main topic is a certain topic. What's urgent for you is X. But if you get to the meeting and that topic, that urgency has nothing to do with the agenda, they'll never include it. So it's very important that you know the agenda, and then you can say, well, my priority is this one. I'm going to see under what topics of the agenda I can include it. So you need to prepare. So whenever you go to a meeting at the UN or any other body, international bodies, you have to know the agenda so that you can prepare how you're going to lobby. The NGOs, the NGO representations of the civil organizations that are included, that is also the indigenous peoples, they can participate in the commission, but they need to have what's called consultative status. The consultative status is a qualification that the UN provides to some organizations. So it's a process through which many organizations can participate. So they can request to have a consultative status, and that's how they can participate at the session. What happens if our organizations don't have consultative status? If they don't have consultative status, then you can ally or partner with some other organization that does, and then become accredited under the name of that other organization. So many organizations, what they do is that. How do you participate at the CSW? Well, it could be through panels. You can organize panels, or you can be invited as a presenter at a panel, roundtables, parallel events, or through oral or written contributions. The parallel events are many, and with the pandemic, they're fewer. But now that things are kind of like going back to normal situation, I imagine that they're now like they used to be. Parallel events mean parallel events that happen at the same time as the official session. So often, it's very difficult to participate at the official sessions because, as I said, that's the government representatives that are present. Many times the governments invite organizations, civil organizations, to participate, to be able to speak. And that's very important. Some governments have done that. For example, Guatemala sometimes does that. Canada, Bolivia as well, Ecuador. So the government representatives, instead of them taking the floor, they give it to indigenous representatives, for example. They can do that. But if it's not possible to participate at the official events, you can organize parallel events. And they can be used to put on the global agenda our topics. When we started our participation at CSW many years ago, the first time I participated was in 2005.
Representación de mujeres indígenas.
There was almost no representation by indigenous women, very few. That was not a priority at all. And that was, as I said, in 2005. But now we're going to see how that got expanded and why. It wasn't because someone liked the topic, but because of pressure, lobbying, advocacy that several indigenous sisters through their participation have achieved.
So the important thing, as I was saying, is that the commission, the CSW, during each session, they end up with a final report. And in the final report, there are some resolutions. Now, 2005 was the first time that they adopted a resolution specifically dedicated to Indigenous women. And that was in the 49th session. So imagine, from the time that CSW was created, they had to have 49 sessions so that for the first time, they would be able to adopt a resolution on women, Indigenous women. And why did they do so? Because of the advocacy of Indigenous women during and before the session. There were a number of governments who supported the Indigenous women in this, because the Indigenous women themselves can't even take the floor during the session and say, I propose that CSW adopt this resolution. They're not allowed to do that. Only the governments are allowed to propose resolutions. So there were some governments, primarily Bolivia in this case, that joined with the Indigenous women's group and wrote out the resolution with them, advocated with other governments to support the resolution, and that's how the first resolution was adopted. And it's a very short resolution compared with what comes later. I will leave you the link there so that you can look at it. And then if we have a little bit more time, we can look at it directly. In the 56th period of sessions in 2012, once again, there was another resolution that was adopted. And these are the only two resolution that CSW has adopted that has something to do with Indigenous women. This one is a little broader. It goes into greater depth on the vision and the priorities and development of Indigenous women. We can continue. So far, we have the CSW. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about CEDAW. But before talking about CEDAW, I would like to open up a little space here to find out whether you have any questions about CSW. As I was explaining, CEDAW and CSW are connected. And there's another thing I wanted to comment on also, and that is that the CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, has a organization inside the UN that performs the administrative work, the Secretariat. And basically that's UN Women. So UN Women is behind CSW, organizing the sessions, organizing the documents, everything logistic for the Commission on the Status of Women is done by UN Women. And so that's why it's important to connect the pieces. You see, CSW over here and CEDAW over there and UN Women here, but they are connected. And so it's important to understand those connections as well. So I wonder if any of you have any questions. You're welcome to write them in the chat or just unmute your microphones and comment as you wish. We want to invite the participants to ask questions and make comments. I see there's someone named Medalit who might like to make a comment. Yes, good evening. Thank you so much, Mariana, for teaching us today. My question has to do with the point that you touched on. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it well, but it's the CSW. There was a point where it was saying that organizations could participate in them or that you could apply to do so. And I guess my question is, what's the profile of these organizations, or how does the UN evaluate, or how do the governments evaluate whether or not they're going to allow people to participate from different organizations? Because in Peru, we have a whole bunch of organizations, but I'd like to know what kind of profile do organizations have to have so that they might be allowed to speak? Any organization from civil society, including organizations of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous women, can participate. They are allowed underneath the NGO section. So there's not a particular profile the organization has to have. Anyone can participate. The thing is that you have to be accredited. So to be able to have the accreditation to even get into the UN building and get into the meetings of the UN and the meetings of this commission, the organization has to have what's called consultative status. There are some organizations that in order to achieve this consultative status, they take a year to get it. And there are others that are able to get it more quickly. So you have to, once you have the consultative status, it's not just for the CSW, it's for all of the UN. And so you present your petition and you have to present a lot of documents, and the UN then evaluates that and then makes a decision on yes or no whether they're going to give you consultative status. Now, there's a lot of Indigenous organizations that don't have consultative status, but they do want to be accredited. What they do is they look for organizations that do have this status. There are thousands of organizations in many countries that have consultative status. And there are a lot of women's organizations that have been working with this CSW for many years that have consultative status, and they often help us to get accreditation. And if you aren't able to get consultative status, you can participate in side events, non-official events. But to participate in the official events, you have to be accredited. So it's not super complicated, but we do have to have an organization that helps us to become accredited. For example, FEME often, together with the organization called Madre, which is another women's organization, collaborates a lot to help accredit organizations so that they can participate. So if any of you are interested, what I would suggest would be that you communicate with FEME first of all and ask for that collaboration that will help you to get accredited. But any Indigenous women's organizations could participate. I hope I was able to respond to your question. Are there any other questions about the commission? If not, we can go on to the CEDAW. And then we can leave some time for questions and answers on that afterwards. So now I'm going to share my screen again. There it is. Okay, so if you don't see something or if something is confusing, let me know. So right now we're going to talk about the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's also known by its English acronym CEDAW or CEDAW. It's very important to recognize that what we were talking about before was a commission, and a commission is a group of people. In this case, it's an intergovernmental group, and so they're member states of the UN that form the commission, that make up the members of the commission. Those member states review and discuss and debate different topics, and they put together a report with various resolutions. So that's the Commission on the Status of Women. But this is a convention, which is totally different. A convention is a text, and in this case, it's a text that was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly, and it entered into force, or it became, the convention was declared ready to be ratified by the states in 1981. So this is considered the International Charter on the Rights of Women. It's a convention that the UN adopts and the member states sign and ratify it if they want. So that's an important thing to know about conventions, that it's an instrument of international law, and the states decide whether they're going to sign and ratify it or not. So CEDAW is very important because it's the second most ratified international instrument, that's second most ratified by member states. The first is the Convention on the Rights of Children, and the CEDAW is the second that has the most signatories. It was ratified by 189 countries. And in this link, you can see if your country is one of the ratifying countries or not. There's a difference between signing the convention and ratifying the convention. Those who sign it, For example, the United States, which doesn't ratify very often, it might sign that it has goodwill and intends to comply with what the convention says. And so it commits to do nothing against the convention, but it also doesn't make any particular commitment to it. But the countries that ratify the convention have a legal commitment to comply with the provisions of the convention. It's very important to read the text of the convention. Today, we aren't going to be able to look at the entire text because we don't have time, but it is interesting to look at it, and you'll realize the progress that was made through this convention. And there are some topics that perhaps were not priority then, but we see as priority now. The convention is important because it's a very, it establishes a broad definition of the discrimination against women. It's not just discrimination against women in a particular aspect, but it tries to include direct and indirect discrimination against women. So intentional, when women are discriminated against on purpose, we can say, with an intention of discriminate, but also unintentional discrimination. There is a law that perhaps didn't have an intention of discriminating against women, but unintentionally it does discriminate against women. Same thing with a practice or an action or a policy. So this definition includes all aspects of discrimination in the public sphere and in the private sphere. So that's why this broad idea of discrimination is important. But obviously, you can imagine that during that time, there was no mention of what might later be called indigenous peoples, nor did they mention race or ethnic origin. We're talking about 1979. So we have the convention, and the General Assembly adopted the convention, which is CEDAW. However, as you can imagine, the text, if there's no one in the UN that gives follow-up to how that text of the convention is being followed up and enforced and applied in the countries, no one would comply with anything. So in addition to adopting the convention, the UN created a committee, a CEDAW committee. So we have the convention, which is the text, and we have the committee. The CEDAW committee is called a treaty body. So what does that mean? So there's a treaty, which is the convention in this case. And under that convention, there are a number of bodies created, in this case, the committee is created to follow up on this convention. So the mandate of the CEDAW committee is to supervise the application of the primary international treaties, in this case, the application of the CEDAW Convention. So within the UN, there are 10 human rights treaty bodies because each convention has its committee. This committee is made up of experts, but what's very important is that they have to be independent experts. So the members of the CEDAW committee should not have to report to their government. They're not under the mandate of their government. So if I'm on the CEDAW committee as an expert, I don't have to follow anything that the Argentine government says. I'm not speaking as a country. On the contrary, I'm independent. And why do we need to be independent? Because imagine if you have to answer to your states, they will never say, oh, well, our state is violating the convention, or I have a neighbor state, but I don't want to criticize them, or I'm going to criticize this one over here because we don't get along and we're not allies. So that's why it's really important that the CEDAW experts be independent. So there are 23 experts on the CEDAW committee, and they are experts on the rights of women from all over the world, and they act as individuals, not as representatives of the states, but the states do present their candidacy. Here we have the list of the members, today's members of the CEDAW committee. It's interesting that you can see if your country's there or not, because these people, they are there on their own account, right, as individuals. So if you have a way to communicate with these people, it would be important to do so, because you can get them information. And when they have to evaluate what's happening in a certain country, they will have the information that you have provided them, and that will be very useful to you. Another important aspect of the convention is the facultative protocol, which went into effect in December of 2000, many years afterwards. It's because the convention was adopted in 1979, but the protocols didn't come out until December 2000. So what is the facultative protocol? It's used to examine communications that are presented by people or groups of people who are alleging violations of the convention in the states. So if the first thing you need to do if you want to do anything under this convention is to see if your country has ratified the convention or not. If your country did not ratify the convention and the protocol, it's going to be very hard for the commission or the committee, sorry, to evaluate your country. And then you need to look at which article of the convention is being violated, because I might have a lot of different problems, but they have to be related to the convention. Because, so you need to say which article of the convention is not being respected in your country. In CEDAW, what we have is that countries have to present reports at different times. One country does it this year, and then another country 2 years later. At different times, the states issue reports. And the reports have to explain how their country is making progress in the compliance with the convention, what they are doing to comply with the convention. In the last period, since the countries always like to write reports that make them look good, I haven't looked at all of them. There may be some that are self-critical, but it's really hard to get countries to recognize bad things that they're doing. So generally, they will issue a report saying that everything's great, that they're complying with everything that is in the convention. And generally what they do is they try to talk about things in really general ways. So they don't really talk about concrete things that are happening. So the CEDAW committee created a list of questions. So before they present their report, they receive a list of questions which they do have to respond to. They're required to respond to. So they're more concrete questions so that they don't just speak generally in the report. So this has to do with the protocol, as I mentioned, and you can see on the web page what the form is that you can use if you want to present a complaint under the protocol. So now the next session is going to be the 84th session. It's actually just ended February 6th to February 24th, and this is the link to that session. And here's the 85th session link, and it has information as well. And it would be interesting for you to see what countries are going to present reports during this session. You can see if your own country is planning to present a report or not during this session. One very important thing about CEDAW is the following. In Article 21 of the Convention, it is permitted for the committee to make recommendations after the convention. So we have the convention adopted in 1979, but since as the years go by, there are things that come up that you realize are not included in the convention, the committee is allowed to adopt recommendations. And these recommendations are the things that the countries have to look at in addition to the content of the convention itself. So far, the committee has adopted 39 general recommendations from the time in which it was created. 39 recommendations total, and there's the link that you have to that list of recommendations. At the beginning, during the first 10 years of the life of the committee, the recommendations were more had to do with methodologies, formats, how to put together a report, what happens when a state ratifies the convention, but ratifies with a reservation. Sometimes states will ratify, but they'll put a little asterisk and they'll say, we don't agree with this particular point. So what happens then? The state is going to have to show what it's doing on that, or since they already placed a reservation, sometimes they're not held to task on that particular point. So the first years, they were sort of practical recommendations that the committee was making, but later it changed and they started to adopt recommendations that had to do with specific topics. And they called them cross-cutting topics, topics that are important for women, but that are not included in the convention. So I would invite you, or maybe we can see, can anyone imagine what the Convention against on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, can you imagine that they did not even include the word violence? Today it would be unthinkable. But if you look at the text of the convention from 1979, the word violence does not appear. Imagine. Much less sexual rights or even the word sexual, nothing about reproductive rights. So that was 1979, and undoubtedly, to be able to get a text adopted, sometimes you have to take out certain topics that governments don't want to agree to. Now, I was very young at that time, just kind of recently born, in fact, and I don't know exactly what the negotiations were like, but I imagine that maybe they weren't able to include certain words, not that the women forgot about them. But if they included certain words, countries weren't going to sign on. But you can fix that by through recommendations. And in 1992, the 19th recommendation was adopted on violence against women. So it's as if it's it's an appendix or an annex to the convention. So we're now the violence against women is included in the convention. In 2017, several years later, almost 30 years later, you have the general recommendation number 35 that talks a little bit more broadly about women, and it updates general recommendation number 19. And why am I telling you all about the recommendations? Why is this important? Last year, in October of 2022, the committee adopted general recommendation number 39 about the rights of Indigenous women and girls. So almost 15 years, maybe even more, and 15 years later, Indigenous women were doing advocacy to be included in this recommendation. And in the session of the permanent forum, the second or third session of the permanent forum, there was a beginning of an action for CEDAW to adopt a resolution on Indigenous women and women. So each Indigenous woman who participated in FEME put forward this idea of adopting this resolution. And finally, they were able to do this last year in October 2022, primarily because a great ally within CEDAW, who is Gladys Acosta, who's a Peruvian woman, and she was president of the chair of the committee, and she was very close to the struggle of Indigenous women. So thanks to her work in the committee and all of the women who participated in the advocacy, they were able to get this recommendation included. And so I really recommend that you read this in detail because it's super important and interesting. So let's do a little exercise in a little bit. And I'm going to, well, the first thing I want to do is to open up for some questions and answers to see if you have any questions about CEDAW. And if not, then I'll show you a little bit about the webpage.
First, I wanted to see if you had any questions or if there is anything that was not quite clear. Yes, Regina. Regina.
Good morning. I'm Regina from Indonesia. So you have explained about the CEDAW. So I would like to ask, like, Indonesian government have ratified the convention. However, like Indonesian government has like several law in order to legalize, for example, child marriage still legalized in Indonesia through the religious court, and also the female genital mutilations is legalized also because of the religion. And then we have a province here like Aceh, they apply Sharia law, which allow like with punishment for women or forced victim of sexual violence to marry the perpetrator. So I would like to ask, is it more important to, because you explained before, like it is whether the UN have a mechanism and stuff, but the most important thing I think is for to lobbying the government, because there are some mechanism that need like representation from the government, and the government only can make the what is it called? So the government only can make some recommendations. So my question is, is it the mechanism really helpful for the victims or for the for us, or is it more important to lobbying the government? Because at the end of the day, I think it's the government that take the decisions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Regina. Yes, I remember have been communication before. Yes, well, the CEDAW Convention is a tool for you and your organization to advocate in the government at different levels. You can use the CEDAW to make a change in your government. So you have to plan it. So the advocacy needs a plan. We cannot just do a lot of things. It's important to have a planning how to do the advocacy, because to be effective, we need an advocacy at different levels. So one level is international. And of course, you will be advocating for a change in your government, but at international level. So if you participate in the CEDAW committee, for example, you will be doing advocacy for your to your government, right? But at international level. And sometimes the governments are more open when you meet them, the UN, than when you go, an office in your country. So it's important to use the different scenarios to do the advocacy, to do it at international, to do it nationally and regionally, or maybe other levels. But it's important to see the advocacy like an integral plan. So you will have actions at different levels. So the convention is a tool. You have to check when your country will be deliver the report and what they are saying in that report. And is it possible for you and your organization to also present a shadow report explaining what is doing badly the government, not to present a shadow report? That is very important. If you cannot present a shadow report, maybe you can make a communication or a statement. And after the government presents their report, where they explain and they show very good things that we know they are not true, the committee of CEDAW send them final observations. So you have to check also the final observation. And if the observation are, focus or link to your priorities, you can use the observations also for advocacy. So for example, when you go to a governmental office to discuss something, you can use the observations saying, okay, CEDAW is asking you to change this and that. So it's not ourselves, it's not only my organization, it's the CEDAW that is asking you to change. So you can use the observation of the CEDAW because they are tools for you for advocacy. And also when you prepare a press conference, it's not just you and your organization saying what is happening, it's also the UN and the CEDAW saying the same. So that's why it's important for all of you to learn what your government is saying and what the CEDAW is observing them. It's very important that you have that information because for you, they are tools for advocacy. I hope that I answered the question.
Thank you.
Okay. Juliana.
Muchísimas gracias por
Thank you so much for your presentation. It is really important for us as part of this process, strengthening our capabilities, to strengthen our communities too, and knowing the history of this framework, which is going to be helpful to advocate. We know that throughout history, the struggle, women's struggle has been great, but even greater for Indigenous women. And I wanted to ask then, how have you seen from your experience the progress in terms of recognizing individual and collective rights, specifically for Indigenous women in this convention? We know that it is a tool that is binding, legally binding, but since specific rights for women as Indigenous women have not been recognized, it's limiting for us, right? In our countries, when we want to require our governments to comply with recognizing these rights. So how have you seen that progress from your experience? Because it's been quite difficult for Indigenous women to even advocate at this convention, although it's specifically for women. Yes, right, it's been difficult. But organizations have learned so much, and Indigenous women have learned so much. Such progress has been made. Even though the convention does not mention Indigenous women, and the recommendation was just adopted recently, last year. However, the committee started including in its question Indigenous women's issues. So perhaps governments were saying that everything was going well, and the committee would ask, and how about Indigenous women? What's the situation? So it started to create this awareness by asking in their observations about Indigenous women. Why did they adopt this? Well, thanks to the advocacy by women leaders who started participating. At the beginning, they were included in the women's movement. So there were feminist organizations in several countries that perhaps would take one Indigenous representative, or they would write a shadow report, and they included a paragraph or a chapter on Indigenous women. So at the beginning, the participation in many cases came through feminist organizations. However, when women started to empower themselves and to get to know more information and have more partners, more allies, they understood that they could do this independently and not to depend on being linked to feminist organizations somehow. That's how we started to see organizations. FEMI as a global organization, but then also other national organizations of Indigenous women, which started participating at the CEDA sessions. They started creating their own reports, their own shadow reports. They presented them, and they were able to have the committee in its observations ask about Indigenous women, or write observations saying such and such is happening in this country. And although for many of us, we can say, well, it's just a comment from the committee. How good is that? A comment by the committee is actually quite powerful, because no government wants to have a bad image at the international level. They all want to be the best countries and have the best image. So to be asked about these issues often makes the state start making some changes and proposals and developments, changing policies, establishing consultation mechanisms, many things that without that international pressure, they wouldn't be doing. So to have the committee mentioning specifically Indigenous women's issues for a country, in relation to a country, We may not see the result immediately or the impact right away, but we see it throughout the years. We see the changes over time. So I do see that some progress, quite a bit of progress has been made, especially in terms of how the committee is now paying attention to Indigenous women in the country reports. It does not leave that aside if the countries don't specifically mention Indigenous women's issues. So, for example, if a country asks for a report on the situation of Indigenous women, they're going to have to add that. So that's progress in itself. So first we need to know what I want to change. But if I make it invisible, if I don't show it, if I don't report on it, that's not going to change. Once it has to be reported, we can hope for change. Any other questions? I wanted to check with our organizers how much more time do we have. We're doing well, Mariana. We will then have a space for questions, but I think that we're actually doing that already. So we have until, well, I'd say about 40 minutes. We have about 40, 50 minutes. Okay, very good. I see another question. Medalis? Yes, Mariana, it's me again. So I am going to ask all questions now. Why not? What should we do, for example, in the case of Peru? I haven't seen Peru on the list. How can we, as you have said, we can ask through the CIDAO, we can ask the government to comply with certain legislative processes, for example, right? But we are not on the list. So I now say that I understand why it takes so long to have them really be interested in a law. For example, the most recent one has been the forced marriage with girls. So a year's gone by and we have met. So this was with what's happened, the changes in government. They're not interested, they're interested in different issues. So how can we work with them if we're not on that list with the CIDA? This is a very important point. The list that I showed you is a list of the CIDA committee members. Those are the people at the committee. But that doesn't have anything to do in terms of whether the country is ratified or not. So what you have to do is look whether your country ratified the CIDA. So there's 189 countries who ratified it. The majority of our countries ratified, especially Latin America, all of them. So Peru ratified the convention. So Peru is being evaluated. The list that I show you is just a committee. Those are the one who evaluate what's happening. But nationality has nothing to do with it because they evaluate at an independent level. So it doesn't see if the person is from Guatemala, it doesn't matter. They can evaluate what's happening in Peru. And if they're from Peru, they're going to evaluate Peru as if they were neutral. So why did I show you the list? Well, it's important because if you see someone, a member that is from your country or from another country, but you know this person, you have access to this person somehow because typically they're experts and often, they're countries who are already involved in CIDA. So you may run into them at some conference or some meetings. So that's why it's important to know who the members are. But that's independent from whether the countries have ratified or not. If you'd like, we can now look to see where you can search the issue of the countries. I'm going to show you I'm going to show you my screen. I'm going to share my screen rather. Allow me just one moment
la pantalla.
to share my screen.
Un minutito. Acá. Pero no lo encontraba.
Just one moment, I couldn't find it.
Ustedes acá ven
So,
mi
okay.
tool, ¿no es cierto? Bueno,
Can you
esta
see
es
this
la
page?
página
Okay, I just Googled
general
this. This is the general
de,
page, the main
eh,
page
de la Comisión de la Condición
of
Jurídica y
the
Social de la Mujer.
CSW.
Está dentro de ONU Mujeres. Este link
You can see that it's
yo ya se lo
inside
compartí en la
ONU
presentación.
Women,
Si lo quieren
UN
ver,
Women,
lo
I'm sorry.
pueden
This link
buscar.
is in the presentation, but you can copy
Y
it from here right
también
now.
puede estar en inglés,
And as you can
español,
see, you can
francés.
toggle between English, Spanish, or French.
Dentro de ONU Mujeres está la comisión.
So within
Y
UN
acá
Women
ustedes
is
pueden
where the commission is.
Bueno,
And here you
primero
can
conocer,
see
se
first
cuenta un poco la historia.
a little bit
Y
about
acá
its
pueden ver
history,
periodos de
and you can see
sesiones
the different
de la comisión.
sessions
Si a ustedes les interesa
of the
algún
commission.
periodo en
So
particular,
if you're interested in a
pueden
particular period of time,
apretarlo y ahí van
you
a
can
ver
click on
toda
it
la
and see
información. Por
all of the
ejemplo,
information there.
¿recuerdan que yo les dije
For example, do you remember that I
que en
mentioned
el periodo
that
56
in the
del
56th
2012,
period, which was in 2012,
donde se adopta la
is
segunda
when the
recomendación?
second recommendation was adopted,
Entonces
the
acá
one on
ustedes
Indigenous women.
pueden sacar el
So here you
informe
can click and you can get the
en
report.
diferentes idiomas y buscar
It's in different
el
languages,
texto
and you can
de
find the
la
text
resolución.
pertaining to the resolution, the second resolution.
Entonces, esto es un poquito para que ustedes
So this is just so
vean
that you can
la
see
página
the page
de la convención, de la comisión,
of the Commission on the Status of
para que la
Women,
vayan investigando.
so that you can start
Por ejemplo,
researching it a little bit.
que
So for
está
example, what
participación de
is
ONGs,
CSW, NGOs participation? You asked me earlier how they can participate. So if you click here, it gives you a whole explanation, eligibility, registration, opportunities to participate. So when you can talk to the commission, accessibility in case there are any disabilities. So here you can find a lot of information, the member states. So you can see the 45 members, the 45 countries in the commission that rotate. So you can see a lot of things. You can play around and get to know a lot about the commission. And it is in different languages. That's very important. Then you have the page for the committee or the convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. This is within the OHCHR. So here's the CIDAO committee, and you can find here all of the human rights instruments and mechanisms. You can find all the special repertoires. You can go by subject, by topic, or by country. The same here. First, there's an explanation what this is about. You can see the members, how they're elected, and all of the information related to the CIDAO. This is the part that I wanted to see with you, the reports by the member states. Here's the calendar if you want to see which countries will have to present a report. And you can also search and select a country. For example, Australia. I click on it and open up the database, and I can find all of the documents. This is the database. So by country, I can select the country. I did Australia, and it shows me all of the documents related to Australia. So here's where you select the country. And then the type of document on this side, on the left. So if I want a report by the state, I can see the final observations and then an additional report. If I want to see the report part of and the final observations, I can click here to see the document. And there's the document in English, French, or Spanish. I can open it up in English, for example. And here's all of the information that Australia is providing to the committee, to the convention. The convention made this recommendation, and see, we're actually talking about Indigenous women, and within this document by Australia, there's a recommendation concerning Indigenous women. The committee recommended to recognize First Nations. That's why Indigenous peoples are called in Australia. So recognize First Nations in the Constitution to enable Indigenous women to claim their rights. This that it says right here is the recommendation by the committee. And Australia replies here with everything they're doing concerning that recommendation. You can see that. Here, we see another recommendation by the committee that has to do with something else. It's also on Indigenous women. So there's the recommendation and then the answer, the reply by the country. So that's why it's so important that you find the information pertaining to your country, because sometimes one can be surprised about what the country says that it's doing, and you can see the information there, and one can contribute to that information. On this page, then we have general recommendations. The Committee for the Commission for the Elimination on the Discrimination of Women, and other recommendations, 39, 38, 31, etc. I'd like now to show you, these are the last sessions. This is the next session from May 8th to 26th. This one has passed already. That was in February. So I'm going to go to the one that has already happened in February so that you can see the information available here. Here's the list of the countries that were evaluated. So we can see Kuwait, Malaysia, Oman, the Republic of Korea, Sri Lanka. These were the countries evaluated in February. Argentina, so this is the list of questions prior to the report. In Argentina, for example, here's all of the information. Report of the state, the member state, right here. That is the document that the country presented. If I click on see the document, I'm going to find the report that the country presented. I'm going to see what the country said. But then below, as you can see, you can find all of the information that civil society organizations presented to the committee as well. So I can see some International Amnesty. These are all of the NGOs that presented documents to the committee. Australia, same thing. All of the NGOs that presented shadow reports. So what is this for? Well, as I said, the country, when they present a report, they report all the good stuff that they're doing, all of the good things they're doing. And then the committee to evaluate the country, it takes into account information by civil organizations because the observations could be more real, more specific. It doesn't require an investigation in all the countries. It just use them to obtain a little bit more specific information. Now, we have half an hour left. I would like to ask you if we can do an exercise. I'm going to give you a link. Let me see, just a moment. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's a database. It's the CEDAW database, is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women's database. And I would like you to take 5 minutes to try to find your countries in that link that I've given you. And the idea is for you to find the last report presented by the government, by the state, the date, and see whether there is any reference to Indigenous women. And also see if you can find the latest observations by the convention to the state, by the committee to the state, to your country. And I'd like the date and the reference. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to see if you can find your country. So the report by the state, the date and references to Indigenous women, latest observations, the latest final observations by the committee, and date and references to Indigenous women in those observations. You're a little quiet.
What's the topic we should look for? Well, the link that I sent you in the chat, if you go into that link, see if you can find any report from your countries. Just see if you can find your country. If anyone finds your country, why don't you just activate your microphone and tell us that you found it.
I did find India.
Did you find the final report submitted by the state? Try to find the report of the state, because you will find a lot of documentation. ¿Alguien más encontró su país? Vamos que se puede.
Did anyone else find their country?
I found Indonesia on the list.
Good, Regina. Excellent.
Encontré el reporte de Guatemala del 2021.
I found a report from Guatemala from 2021. Oh yeah, very current. I'd like to ask a question. I found a report, but it looks like it was jointly written with other countries. It was January of last year. Yes, if you click on that, I'm sure you'll find something that came in just from your country. because there they put down all of the countries that reported on that date. But if you click on it, you'll find yours country is separate.
Miren, por ejemplo, ¿no?
Uh,
Les comparto mi pantalla.
I can give you an example here by sharing my screen.
Aquí ven que
Here you can see
escribí India.
that I wrote India in the search bar.
El nombre de su
So put the name of your country there.
Y aquí veo
And here
State Parties Report.
you can see states, parties, reports,
La fecha 2014.
and there's the date from 2014.
Ustedes apretan ahí,
And so if you
dice mi
click
compañera,
here,
hay varios países.
or if you look there, you see that there's a number of countries that are named.
Apretan ahí,
But if you click there,
ahí ven que es la sesión 58.
it's from session 58.
Y apretan ahí, ahí está.
You do
Vemos la
click
sesión
there, you'll see session 58
del 2014.
of 2014.
Y podemos ver
And we can see
y podemos ver más abajo.
if you scroll down, you'll see all this general information, and then down below you'll see the countries.
Tenemos la República
So we have here the Central African Republic,
Eswatini,
Eswatini,
Georgia,
Georgia,
India.
and here's India.
Aquí sí encontramos la
So here we did find India,
State Party
and it
Report,
says state
justamente
parties report there. So that's in fact the
lo apretamos ahí,
report that they sent in. And if we click on view document, we can see the report that the country presented. So the last report of India was in 2014. There are some annexes.
el listado
You can see the list of issues
que la CEDAW le entregó a la India.
that the CEDAW committee gave to India to respond to.
Tenemos la respuesta.
We also have the reply to the list of issues. So it'd be interesting to see if in those issues the country included anything about Indigenous women. We also have information here from civil society organizations. So here we see on India all of these organizations that have presented their reports.
Yo no puedo reconocer, pero tal vez
I
compañeras de la
don't
India
know some of these, but perhaps one of our participants from India might be able to see if there's any Indigenous women's organization that has presented a report,
alternativos.
which are alternative reports to the official report.
Acá tenemos la listado de los participantes.
Here we have the list of participants,
Comisión y todos los informes.
and you have all the different reports.
Cada país.
That's why it's really interesting to look by country.
Por aquí está Perú.
And here's Peru, look, 2014 as well.
Podemos ver
So here we can also click on the Peru's state report, and we can click on the document,
ver si incluyó
and we can see if they included, let's open it up in Spanish here.
vamos a ver si incluyeron
So we'll see, here's the report, and we can see if they've included anything about Indigenous women or not.
mujer rural.
We have something about rural women,
Bueno, es importante ver quiénes
and it's important to see who participated in the report as well.
de Perú
So that's one from Peru.
y ver qué
And you can see what civil society organizations, for example, Flora Tristan is a feminist organization that has supported women's organizations quite a bit if they wanted to participate in CEDAW. So those are the civil society organizations that participated by presenting alternative reports. Now, if anyone's having trouble finding your country, we can look for it together here.
Sí, hola Mariana. México. Yo solo encontré que 2016.
Yes, for Mexico, I just found 2016, but I went in specifically to look for the CEDAW report, and it looks like the last one was 2016. However, they didn't mention Indigenous women in their report. And I can't see if any non-governmental organizations participated with their alternative reports. Okay, let's look for Mexico. I see in the chat that Jonetti found Nicaragua and Doris found the Philippines, so that's great. Let's look for Mexico. And I see Siobhan, you have your hand up. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, but I also just wanted to say I think it's very interesting that the US helped drafted the convention, but they don't have any record of participating or submitting reports. And they I know that in Geneva in last year in July, there were many in the UN that were calling on the US to adhere to the convention after they turned over Roe v. Wade, because I know for those of us in the US, we're struggling to get access to reproductive rights. But I was just shocked now looking to see if the US has ever has any history of reports as part of this committee and convention, and was shocked to see that they have no records, or they just don't participate, or it doesn't seem like they participate. Yeah, so I think it definitely reminds me that it's a struggle, because I think the US is one of the only of the 7 countries that haven't ratified this convention. And I know currently, and I know Nicole can also relate, being that the tribes are kind of within the US. And then for me, Guam being a territory of the US, that we're kind of up against their unwillingness, I guess, to participate in this convention or in these committees. But yeah, I guess I was just a little bit shocked to not see them there.
Yes, yes, you're right. You know, the US is one of the very big country that has not ratified many of the, it's not just only the CEDAW, it's many of the convention, because most of all, it's a question of sovereignty. They don't want to recognize that the UN can tell them what to do. They want to, you know, to be like not recognizing the role of the UN in that case. So in any case, there are other forms, because maybe they endorse others documents that maybe are not legal binding, but you can use them also as advocacy. But of course, they are not presenting reports, so this is not good, of course, because it's good that the governments are obligated to present reports and showing the advancement. So now I'm going to look for Mexico, and later I will show you another link where you can find a database of the different treaty bodies and check if your country has ratified any of them. So not just the CEDAW, we can check the others convention, and that is good. So now I'm going to share again and check what happened with Mexico. So here in states, and for our friends from the Spanish speakers, las compañeras que hablan en español.
And so for our friends who speak in Spanish, never feel intimidated by web pages that are in English, because, and you'll see in the database is often in English, and even though all of the information of the commission is in different languages, the database is in English. But, you know, you can just find the text and run it through a translator. Some of our friends say, no, this is intimidating. I'm not going to deal with it because it's in English. But take it, cut it, paste it into a translator and read it that way. So don't feel intimidated if you find something in English and you don't read English very well. Okay, let's see if we can find Mexico. There's Mexico. All right, it's updated. So the last report of Mexico was in 2018. That's the last one we're going to find. So when we click there, we see that it's session number 70. The first column is the number of session. So it's the 70th session. You see all the documents that were created for that. And then before that, you can find the countries. Sorry, after that, you can find the countries. You can find Australia, Cook Islands, Cyprus, Liechtenstein, and there's Mexico. So here at the State Party report, you can see the document that the state of Mexico wrote. And here's the list of questions. Here's all the responses, the replies to those questions, and here's information from the civil society organizations. And we can see which organizations participated. Amnesty International is always present. There's something called the UNESCO Teaching Organization of Human Rights in the Autonomous University of Mexico. And there's the Center for the Rights of Women in Chiapas. So that could have something to do with Indigenous women. And here we have many other organizations. I think the process of putting together a shadow report is not something that's particularly fast. If you want to have some impact on the committee, and you want this committee to respond to the government and to question the government report, then you can write a shadow report, and it needs to be a substantial report. You can't just say Indigenous women are discriminated against. Generally, you have to be sure to write very specific points. Here in 2018, there's a report presented by FEMI and the Alliance of Indigenous Women of Central America and Mexico, and the International Coalition for Access to Land. So they came up with an report. It's in Spanish here. I'm going to click on that, and I can find the report that was written. This is written by colleagues in FEMI, the Alliance, and other organizations. So that's how it works. So I hope you could see that I changed a web page at this point. Okay. Sometimes you go from one page to the next, and I can see what's up, but you guys can't. So let me know if you can't see something. But basically, we're trying to say that you have examples of what a shadow report looks like and how other organizations have done it. So you've got a lot of great models for that. And now I want to try to show you this page. This is all in the PowerPoint as well. And this page is from the UN Human Rights Office. And it's the stated ratification of all of the 18 international human rights treaties. And so you have the colors. You can see that the United States is in orange. And here you have states who have ratified, either from 15 to 18 treaties, from 10 to 14 treaties, from 5 to 9 treaties, and from 0 to 4. So the United States really stands out. Here we have, again, all of the different treaties that the country has signed. And when you say signature and ratification, well, it indicates, because if they've just signed, then that means that they have, goodwill to follow the convention, but they don't want to feel like they're obligated to do anything by the UN. So what you want to see is that the report is signed and ratified. So here's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's been signed, or Mexico has signed it, but not ratified it. If you see those who ratified, there were 3 ratified. The International Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, they signed. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Mexico signed. And finally, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. But this is interesting. And you can see by country, and each one can choose. Brazil has 16 treaties, Brazil 18, Chile 17, Canada 13, and you can click and see your country. And if not, you can look here on top and search by treaty. So I click there and I can see other different ones. You have the Convention on People with Disabilities. If I click there, you can see who has signed. So 186 have ratified, and there's another 8 that have just signed. And there's a couple of countries that haven't taken any action at all on the Convention on Persons with Disabilities. So you can see that there's a lot of tools here that allow me to learn about the state. For example, what kinds of commitments has my country made, and what is informing them? So if you know who is informing your country and what kinds of observations the United Nations is making, all of that is information that you can use when you do advocacy. As I was saying before, and I was saying to Regina, if you are having a press conference or you're putting out a report and you say in the UN, the CEDAW committee is asking for the implementation of these actions or the adoption of these policies. That means it's not just you and you organization that feels that it's important. You can tell people that you have this backing for your demands. So it's not just you and your organization that's demanding the state to do this or that. You have the backing of all of the United Nations that is backing your demands and your priority. And so that's why it's important to get to know these reports and get to see what is being said to your government. What kinds of things are the committee saying that your government needs to do? And you can use all of this as tools in advocacy. So any intervention that you might want to do or any statement that you might want to make, or if you decide you're going to do a press conference, you should use these tools to give more weight to what you are proposing. Because obviously, we know your demands are true and important and priority. But if you can show that the United Nations is also backing you in your demands, you're going to have more people listen to you and more response to what you're asking for. So this is what I'm going to say for today. I don't know if anyone's had trouble getting into this or if you'd like to make any comment or share anything. If not, I guess we'll be on our way to closing out. Yes, Elizabeth. Hi, Mariana. What a pleasure to see you even from afar. You show us things in such practical ways. We appreciate that so much. And all of this information exists, but you're able to talk about it in a language that helps us to understand. And just what you said about not being intimidated about saying information in English was important. When we talk about women and women's daily lives in our communities, in our community spaces, and sometimes we ourselves are in this position, but here at the Global School, we're able to learn more. And the main thing in terms of how all of this affects women in their daily lives is that now we have a way of finding more information about our countries. It's important to know whether our countries have signed or not. It's important to know what the U.S. position is because of the economic power and the political power it has around the world. It's an unfortunate situation. But there are many things that need to be worked on. I guess my question is, as we download this information, how can we make impact at a national level with our advocacy and not feel so far away? How can we narrow that informational gap? That's always been a challenge for us. I don't know. Maybe you can help orient us a little bit based on your experience, because we have said, why can't these reports come out in our native languages? Because in our communities, everything's oral anyway, it's not written. But how can we somehow get these things translatable into our languages? So I guess I just have lots of reflections more than a questions. Thank you very much. Yes, that's the challenge that we have, all of us, to put together what's happening at the international level with what's happening at our community level. That's a huge challenge. But my suggestion and my recommendation is that you not be afraid of these conventions and committees. All of these web pages, everything is accessible. Nothing is prohibited in the sense that we can go in, we can see everything that's there, we can read, we can take the time that we need to study the documents there that are interesting so that tomorrow, if we're able to be invited to a conference or some sort of space to participate in a panel, that we will be prepared and that we won't be afraid of reading the reports, understanding them, analyzing them, and even to write our own reports. This is what I'd like to encourage you to do. Often we think, oh no, am I going to analyze and think and write? The answer is yes. We write, we analyze, we read, and this is very important. Even if our handwriting's not great or we don't have the best spelling, but it's important to encourage each other so that we can support each other to be able to do it. No space is closed by itself. Sometimes we have to struggle for them to open it, but if we don't engage in that struggle to try to open those doors, we will be further and further back. So Bridani has a question, I believe, also. Yes, sister. On this page, I see that my country of Peru has not signed or ratified some of the agreements that have to do with economic and political issues. So my question is, how often do these treaties have to be ratified or the conventions have to be ratified? Because there's a lot of time goes by between ratification and signing or any other activity. That's all. Yeah, in reality, there's no particular year. Once the convention is adopted and goes into effect, at any time, the party states can ratify it or sign it. They can do it whenever they have the political will to do it. Then that's when they'll do it. There's no real cycle. So it's when they have the political will to do that. And obviously, the organizations have done their advocacy work so that the countries will be committed to ratifying. Okay, well, I'll turn the floor over to Hortensia so she can help us to close.
Thank you, Mariana. Time flies, right? When we're discussing such important information and everything that we're learning every day, we learn a little bit more, a lot more. And there are many topics that we still need to discuss. And we invite all the participants to put into practice all of this information and all of these exercises, because we also have a lot to contribute to all of Indigenous women and our peoples and our communities. Thank you so much, Mariana. We hope to see you again and to meet in person and to greet each other in person. And thank you for all the work you've done throughout your trajectory. And we thank also all of the FIMI team. And thank you to all of the participants for being here with us. So with this, we'll conclude. But first, we have this very quickly, this recognition, and that is the International Indigenous Women's Forum, that's FIMI, and the school recognizes Mariana Lopez for her participation and contribution to this school for women leaders participating from all over the world. So we thank you and we recognize all of your work, and we know that this leadership school is also a fruit of your labor. So congratulations for all of these achievements, Mariana, and we hope to see you again. Thank you. Thank you. Good night. Good morning. Good evening to everyone. So we will meet again on Friday.
Buenas noches.
Thank you, Sister Mariana.
Gracias.
Buenas noches.